Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to give it a minute, let people get enrolled into the room before we get started. Again, thanks everyone for joining today. We will begin momentarily. Just want to get everyone a second to get into the room. It looks like our attendees entering are starting to slow down, so I will kick things off. Again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Kernan, and I am the Senior Manager of Sales Development here at TPGI. Just want to thank everyone for joining us today and cover a few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded, and we will email everyone the recording after the event. We have captions available, so feel free to use them as needed. We will have time for live Q&A after the presentation. I ask that you please use the Q&A box for your questions, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. We sometimes miss questions if they get entered into the chat box. So if you have a question, please use Q&A and not chat. Lastly, I'd like to mention if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, usability testing, an email will be sent out after the webinar with a link for a time to speak with one of our experts. And with that, I will hand things over to Wes and get started, let him provide an introduction of himself. Wes, I think you're still muted.
You would be correct, Carrie. Sorry about that. There we go. So now you have audio and video and a screen share, correct, everybody?
Looks good for me.
Sweet. Hi, everyone. I am Wes Estes. I am an accessibility engineer at TPGI. I have a BS in electrical and computer engineering. I am Section 508 Trustor certified, and I am CPAC certified with IAAP. And today we're going to be talking about pieces of an accessibility audit, semantics, design patterns, and attributes. Oh my. So what are we doing? Well, that's going to be the underlying theme of this whole presentation. This is one of those topics I could go deep into the weeds on, but I'm going to try and keep things high level and leave that for a future presentation attempt. And one of the many things that we do when we conduct an accessibility audit is to scope the content to be audited and break it down into smaller, manageable components. These components generally align with groups of content, user input flows, or widgets used. And each of these components, or groups thereof, also is generally trying to accomplish some type of goal. This could be as simple as a single button, the user login flow, a confirmation dialog, or so complex that it makes one's head hurt. Either way, it must make sense to your end users though, right? Right? Okay, so why are semantics, design patterns, and attributes important? Well, people like and expect consistency. Being told you successfully ordered a pizza when you thought you were logging into email would be an unexpected and jarring experience, for example. So they provide users of assistive technology a description of the element they are currently focused on or interacting with, and gives them the appropriate attributes to determine current state, as well as clues to what the type of interaction will be. Failure to think about or correctly include these details can make your content inaccessible to all kinds of people. Similarly, including unexpected or incorrect details can confuse, frustrate, or overwhelm your users. All right, Wes, that makes sense. So, what's the issue? Well, often the broader audience, such as users with disabilities, which comprises about 20 to 30% of the population, doesn't get the consideration it needs. How is your content implemented? Did you use existing design patterns for usability and implement each detail correctly to ensure accessibility? I've got a link up here on the page to the W3C's APG patterns site. You need to make things clear for developers by including annotations and functional interaction expectations in your designs. Remember, ultimately, how your design gets coded determines how accessible it is or isn't. So how do we do that? Well, we need to make it clear to the end user what they are interacting with, both visually and programmatically. You need to structure your content, excuse me, you need to structure your content in expected and efficient ways. Don't reinvent the wheel without a good reason. And don't make your users think unnecessarily by confusing or overburdening them. Keep things simple, clear, and straightforward. Have empathy. Think through your content experience from various user groups' perspectives, not just your own, and perform user testing, including a range of abilities and disabilities. So remember, your content is not just a 2D picture. Your content most likely is not simply a wall of text or a static image, but an interactive experience. And each building block that you use needs to tell the user what its name, role, and appropriate attributes are. Each of those building blocks needs to also be presented in a logical order that accomplishes the underlying goal. If designers don't explicitly provide this information, your developers are left guessing. If developers are left guessing and don't code the content correctly, end users are left guessing. And if end users are left guessing, they leave and they go somewhere else. Can you give us an example, Wes? Sure. Let's take a closer look at a simple button. On the screen, I have a picture of a button. It's very plain, and it says pizza. Can you tell if this is accessible just by the picture? I'm hoping in chat right now there's a whole bunch of people screaming, no, 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 because that's the answer. Nope. That's like texting the auto shop a picture of your car and asking if it needs an oil change. The picture doesn't tell the whole story. We can certainly tell if it meets other success criteria, like color contrast, but we need to actually interact with the interactive content to tell if it's been marked up accessibly or not. Okay, so how do we test beyond that 2D picture? Well, we test interaction with visible content and mouse functionality, but we also test with a keyboard only. We ensure that focus order is logical, focus is visible, and controls and widgets behave as expected with that keyboard input. We inspect the code with DevTools, and we check for expected roles, attributes, and accessible names in the accessibility panel. We test with a screen reader to verify that the output makes sense. So, as an example, who does this currently work for or not? We've got that same pizza button that I love. And I'm showing the code for it as well, the HTML anyway. And it's very simple. It's just a div. And it's got an ARIA label attribute of accessible button name and visible text of pizza. And I'm showing on this page as well the computed properties panel of the accessibility panel in DevTools. And it's showing that the computed accessible name for this pizza control is accessible button name, and the role is generic. So What that means is that this quote unquote looks fine visually. It works for someone with vision and the use of a mouse or touch, but it's really just div soup. It's not correctly marked up semantically and it's relying on JavaScript. As a result, it doesn't work for keyboard-only users. It doesn't work for speech input users, and it doesn't work for screen reader users. The control lacks a semantic role. That means screen reader users don't know what it is. They don't know that it's a button. It has an accessible name that doesn't align with the visual text label. That's confusing for screen reader users, and it makes it so that speech input users can't activate this control. And it isn't keyboard focusable, so somebody using a keyboard can't even get to this control to try to activate it. We can, and we should, do better than that. So how do we fix and avoid these issues? Well, use semantic HTML for its built-in features and functionality. Use ARIA attributes for custom widgets, sparingly. Manage focus with the tab index attribute in JavaScript. Ensure accessible names and component roles make sense. And try to avoid reinventing the wheel. Reference existing design patterns wherever possible for the clearest user experience. Okay, so how is that button expected to work? Well, let's take a condensed look at the W3C's APG design pattern for a button. And I've got a link on the page here to the W3C's APG design pattern for a button. And I emphasize condensed because there's a lot of information on that page, and this is just a fraction of it. But it'll tell you things like about this pattern. A button is a widget that enables users to trigger an action or event, such as submitting a form, opening a dialog, canceling an action, or performing a delete operation. It'll tell you the expected keyboard interaction. When the button has focus, space, or enter activates the button. Following button activation, focus is set depending on the type of action the button performs. And it'll also tell you the WAI ARIA roles, states, and properties that are expected. The button has a role of button, an accessible label, and accessible name. Optionally has ARIA described by, is disabled when it's unavailable, and so on. So do we have a working example for this button? Yeah, we can do that. It's the same pizza button example up here. This time I've got under the code two different options, and they both result in the exact same computed properties over here under the accessibility panel. The first uses semantic HTML. It's got a semantic HTML button element. It's got visible text of pizza. And the second is a custom JavaScript button, which uses a HTML div element. It's added tab index equals 0 to put it in the default focus order. It's given it a role of button to tell assistive technology that it's a button. It's got visible text of pizza, and they would have had to go ahead and define a separate JavaScript functions and CSS for this. So they both end up with the exact same results over here, an accessible name of pizza, a role of button, it's focusable, but one is a whole lot easier than the other one. Okay, so what does that button do though? Aha, a both excellent and logical question. Let's think back about this pattern. A button is a widget that enables users to trigger an action or event, such as submitting a form, opening a dialog, canceling an action, or performing a delete operation. So, depending on the button's function, different attributes are expected for more complex button patterns. The presence or absence of these attributes gives clues to users of assistive technology for what type of behavior they should expect when interacting with the control. But all buttons are the same, right? And on the screen, I have that same pizza button that I love and a list of buttons options here. Is it a basic button? Is it a submit button? Is it a custom button? Is it a toggle button, a menu button, a disclosure button, a dialog button? Well, these all look basically the same visually, but under the covers, they're a lot different from each other. Is it a basic button? We've got the pizza button image and the basic button code. It's an HTML button element with visible text pizza. Computed properties, accessible name is pizza, and it's a button that can be focused. And you get all that for free by using semantic HTML. Maybe it's a submit button. This looks strikingly similar. What's the difference? It's just a different type of button. This is explicitly stating that this is a submit button, which you would typically find inside a form, for example, versus another run-of-the-mill type button like the previous example. Maybe it's a custom JavaScript button like we went through before. It's a div that's been turned into a roll of button, put into the default tab order. Is it a toggle button? Now, this is the kind of button where when you press it, it's pressed versus not pressed. Well, you need to convey that state not just visually, but programmatically. So in the toggle button example, it's again a HTML button element. And this time we have an ARIA attribute present. And this one is ARIA pressed equals false or true, depending on which state it's in. Again, with the visible text of pizza. And if we look at the computed properties panel on the right, we can see that it looks very, very similar to the one before. And the only thing that's changed is the very bottom line here has added pressed false. So now the computed properties includes some extra state information about that button. And this is important for assistive technology users to understand whether this toggle button is pressed or not, because they may not be able to see it visually. Is it a menu button? Maybe something that opens up a bunch of other options that can be selected. Well, that has its own set of attributes. It's the same button element, the same visible text of pizza, but now we have ARIA has pop-up equals true. This lets users of assistive technology know that when they activate this button, something is going to pop up, most likely a menu. ARIA expanded equals false or true. This tells users of assistive technology if the content is currently open or closed, shown or hid. And ARIA controls equals menu. Now, in this case, this is just telling the code what is being shown or hidden. This is not necessarily conveyed to a screen reader, for example, just like the ID is not conveyed to a screen reader, but it provides a semantic connection between what's going on. And if we look at the computed properties panel again, we can see it has a couple of extra lines at the end. It has pop-up, menu, and expanded false. So this is additional information that would be conveyed to a screen reader user. Now, when somebody using JAWS, for example, came upon this, they might hear something like pizza, button, has pop-up, collapsed. That'll tell them that this is a button that says pizza. It's currently in the collapsed non-open state, and it has a pop-up that's going to happen when you activate it. How about a disclosure button? This looks eerily similar to the previous one, doesn't it? What's different? The only thing different is this one doesn't have that ARIA has pop-up equals true because there is no pop-up in a disclosure. A disclosure is when you activate a control and it discloses a section of content that was previously hidden. So for instance, if you open up an accordion, that would be disclosing things. It's not a pop-up, so it doesn't have that attribute present. Similarly, a screen reader user coming on this one wouldn't hear that there's a pop-up because there isn't one, but they would hear that there is expanded or collapsed content present based on the ARIA expanded equals true or false attribute that gets computed in the computed properties panel and conveyed to assistive technology. So they'll know if that disclosed section of content is currently closed or visible. Maybe it's a dialog button. It's again the same semantic HTML button element, only this time the only attribute on there is ARIA has pop-up equals dialog. And in the computed properties panel, we specifically see that it's added to the end has pop-up dialog. So now instead of just hearing that this button has a pop-up, the user of assistive technology or screen reader user would hear that this is a dialog that's going to pop up. So when they activate this control, they expect focus to be taken away from them and moved into this new dialog window. All right, summary. That's a whole lot of nuance, and we only covered buttons today. People like and expect consistency, so stick to established design patterns whenever possible. And I've got a link here again to the W3C's ARIA APG design pattern page. Use ARIA sparingly, but use it where appropriate. Those details are important. Ensuring that you have the correct attributes, states, and semantics isn't just a nice to have. It's necessary for users of assistive technology to properly understand and interact with your content. Visual design is important, but so is the underlying structure, patterns used, and attributes provided to your users. Designers, please be clear when designing, annotate what things are and how they interact, not just how they look. And developers, please be clear when developing. Please make sure that both the visual and programmatic design is conveyed to users. Thank you so much for joining us today. This concludes today's session on Pieces of an Accessibility Audit, Semantics, Design Patterns, and Attributes, Oh My, by Wes Estes, Accessibility Engineer, TPGI. I believe we still have time for some questions, so I'll open up the floor. If we have any. We may not have any questions. Maybe I did a great job today. What would be the right semantics of a tooltip? This is a difficult one. In this case, I would say that it should, are the APG, yes, the APG patterns are reliable. The As far as the tooltip one, it would need to say that there's a pop-up, and it would probably automatically read it with the ARIA described by attribute on the control. Tooltips are actually a topic of debate. There's not a reliable pattern for a tooltip on the APG site. Sorry, but there is for many other things. Um, what would be the semantics of a carousel? Okay, so on a carousel, you have simple buttons there. So you have, for instance, forward and backward. Um, those don't need to have any special ARIA attributes necessarily on them. They may need to have an ARIA label to identify what the control is because it's only an image, things like that. But they don't need to have any of the other attributes that I mentioned today. For a control that looks like a button, e.g. login, but upon clicking it opens a different URL. How do we name them? Can we have their accessible name as button acting as link? This is a funny question to me. So this is another argument for using the correct semantics. What is it that your control does? How does it act? Links take you somewhere else. They take you to a new page, a new resource, something along those lines. Buttons leave you on the same page, but do some sort of action. So you wouldn't have a button marked up, or control marked up as a button that acts as a link. That would be a failure. What you should instead is you should instead mark that up as a link, which is its appropriate semantic role. If you're unable to do that, you could technically override the button role and make it into a custom link, but that has other complications because whereas a lot of the functionality of a button you can duplicate with JavaScript, you can't duplicate all of those things with a link. For example, the link URL showing up on hover in the bottom left of a web page, or the ability to open it up in a new tab. You lose these functionalities when you don't use the proper semantics of a link. Any tips on not using ARIA because it's not supported? Like, for example, ARIA controls, that's basically just works if a user actively enables it only in JAWS. This is a great question that I don't have a whole lot of a good answer to be honest. So let me go ahead and table that one, and I'll email you after the fact with a better answer.
Looks like we've had a question pop into the chat. Do you recommend just ARIA authoring practices guide or other resources for someone learning?
Oh, The APG is honestly the best like go-to resource. There's several other resources out there put out by TPGI and other accessibility companies or advocates. Um, you can find several examples, but the just by Googling or whatever your favorite search engine, but the ARIA attribute specifically, I would default to the W3C or some other reputable source. Do I fail WCAG success criteria if there is too much ARIA on a button? Like for example, ARIA expanded and ARIA has pop-up on at the same time. Well, that would indicate that it's a menu button, so I wouldn't fail it for that specific example you provided. But that also assumes that it's operating as a menu button. If it was operating as something else, say for instance, like a basic button, and you included those attributes on it, yes, we would fail it for that, and we'd indicate that the relationship is not being properly conveyed for what it does. You're indicating that it acts as something that it's not, essentially, to users of assistive technology. So we would recommend you remove them in that situation that I've theoretically said. Was there other questions in the chat, Carrie?
I asked the one that had popped up. I don't think I've seen any others. So we maybe about done with questions, unless anyone has anything else they want to chime in with here. I'm seeing lots of thanks and thank yous.
Oh, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate that. I just got the chat open on my side finally, so I can see what's going on here.
All right. If we don't have any additional questions, that one question that was asked was, well, I'll get that emailed over to you so you can think out a response, and we'll get back in touch.
Very awesome. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Hope this was useful. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.